has a theory that people who drive red cars are more likely to drive too fast. On his day off, he borrows one of the department's radar guns, parks his car in a rest area, and measures the number of red cars and non-red cars that are driving too fast. He decides ahead of time to define driving too fast as exceeding the speed limit by more than 5 miles per hour. To produce a random sample, he rolls a die and includes a car in the sample if he rolls a 5 or a 6. He finds that 18 of 28 red cars are driving too fast, and 75 of 205 other cars are driving too fast. Is this convincing evidence that people who drive red cars are more likely to drive too fast? So, I want to do something that's completely aside from just a typical 4-step, because we've talked about it a little bit here and there, but I want to do one as a class. What's something that's talked about a lot that means a lot of different things that's really wordy? What's one thing that's talked about a lot that's wordy? And it could get wordy. No, in this specific problem. What else? That looks bad. We'll go with that. By this policeman. What does it say? Exceeding by 5 miles an hour more or something? So I just wanted to show you an example, which I totally messed up, of a shorthanded version of you can write it. It doesn't have to pertain to like defining a parameter. Anytime you want to shorthand something, you can do this and then use that in reference at any point in time. So now, he borrows one of the radar guns, parks his car in a rest area, measures the number of red cars and non-red cars. We're just talking about that part. So, what's the reason he's rolling a die? Other than the fact he has way too much time on his day off. So he's deciding how they randomly select. It's only randomly selected if it rolls a 5 or 6. So this is our numbers for red cars. Gives us an x of 8, x1 of 18, n1 of 28. And then this is our x2, n2. And this is one of those where I don't really want to call this 1 and 2. What would make more sense to do by subscript for these? And I could even do N, or some people do like NR. So I like to do subscripts that help me remember which one's which instead of just writing numbers and have to remember them. Okay? Yeah. So state. So this thing that I already defined doesn't really have to be part of anything. It's just somewhere on the paper. So now when I do state, what would I need to write? Be the proportion what? I could get a little bit better than just red cars, probably, but it didn't really talk about it. How could I talk about it to actually be better for this problem. Red cars, what?
Drive past this rest stop.
Would probably be better, but because the problem isn't written super descriptive, I think it would be better to say something about portion of red cars that drive past this rest stop, or that are driving on this highway. But since the problem didn't talk about it, that's fine. So portion of red cars that, then what I put. And so now, anytime I want to say that, I don't have to write out a whole bunch of words. I can just write that. And then, so let P of NR be the proportion of non-red cars that are driving too fast. So, what in this problem, let's go ahead and start here. What's our null hypothesis? Does it matter which one I put first? No, so I'm just going to go with the way I wrote it down because the way the problem is. So then write what? And then because it didn't tell us anything about how much faster or how much higher of a percent it wanted of red than not red. So my alternative, I know I'm still going to keep PR minus PNR. I know I'm going to keep 0. So then this is where the very bottom of the left side that I talked about, which one did it say it wanted to be higher? So it said red cars are more likely, which would be bigger minus smaller, which would give me a what kind of number? So I put what here? And then the only thing I haven't written yet is alpha, which it gave us 0.05. Probably gonna type something. Alright, so plan. Where do I start with plan? What? Method. Which is what? Two sample Z test for difference in proportions. What is my first condition? And what do I need to, this one is not as straightforward, maybe. What could I write here? Maybe this is straightforward because it does say in order to do this. Let me write this one. Uses dice to produce a random sample for both red and non-red cars. I think after a while, I actually changed this problem and wrote to produce a random sample. So because I put that in there, you could really say that it was stated it was a random sample for both red and non-red cars. as a first example problem, it's probably better to do that. But if I gave you as a homework problem, I might not put that part in there. But what do I still have to have? What's my next condition? This is going to be n times, wait, no, nr. Yeah, I'm going to write this one. nr times p hat r, nr times 1 minus p hat r, nr times p hat nr, and lowercase n subscript nr times 1 minus p hat subscript nr. All right, so how many of the first one were there? So how many in my, so lowercase n means in my sample. So how many red cars were there in my first sample? How many driving too fast red cars were there? 18. Well, that was out of 28. So in my sample of red cars, how many of them were not driving too fast? In my second sample, which is not red, how many of them were driving too fast? And out of 205, which leaves how many that were not driving too fast? And I need to say what about all of those? All those are greater than or equal to 10. There's one thing that one word that I don't think I wrote in the homework with this. So we're definitely starting out with there at least 10. What applies to all 4 of the different options? They're all what? Cars. But this is the part that I don't think I've read on the board with the homework. I specifically have to mention that as ones that were what? Sampled. So here I can either say sampled or how does he say it? Something about with the that were actually tracked for speed, something like that. So I could write measured for speed or something, but sampled works. So this, I didn't write something about that word in our homework, which I might want to go back and look at really quick. So there are at least 10 residents in this particular medium-sized city sampled or asked. I should have written that word for your homework. And then, so our box, what would I write as success? And I might even do one of those where drive too fast. Oh. Do they drive too fast, yes or no? So I might do like a label like that. And then what are my up top? What would these be? And then how do we need to finish that? My last condition is independent, which is what? 10% condition. So how many red cars were sampled? 28, which means capital N has to be greater than or equal to 280. How many not red cars were sampled? 205, which means how many have to be sampled? This is where match what you said initially. So we defined our within here, we just said red cars and non-red cars, not where. Just because you might see an answer key that looks like this. What word would I put there if I wanted to type it that way? Just showing you that sometimes you'll see it written like that. Actually, I wouldn't have to do anything else there because of the way we wrote it. We only defined our population as red cars and non-red cars, so that's all I would really need to say. Yeah. Before I even write anything with do, no, we'll start it. I'll start it and then we'll do calculator. Okay, so what do I need for do? What am I given? P hat what? P hat R, which is whatever what? P hat NR, which is what else? Which is, and then NR, which is what else? And this one is, as we said, greater than. And I'll pick this 0.05. So our test statistic equation, what goes on top? Just general?
Yeah. R minus P hat.
And then I still have and then what about here? So if I'm doing P hat C, I should have done P hat C somewhere up here. Did I write that on the generic one? Oh, what's that? Let's talk about it and stop and write it down here, and we'll go back to that. Over and R, and then plus P hat C, 1 minus P hat C over N R. So let's go to calculator now. So this is one that I definitely would not recommend typing out by hand. Not only is that a lot to type, but now we also have to calculate p hat c in the middle of it. And your calculator does all of that for you. So when I am first in my calculator, where do I go? What button? Stat, and then what? Tests. We've got tests, we've got intervals. We're dealing with the test. So we're somewhere in 1 through 6. Which one are we today? 6, because we are 2 proportion. Then we're given a list like this. So how many, what is our x1? 18. What is our n1? 28. Our x2? 75. n2? 205. And which one of these 3 options? Greater than. So the last one. So yours should look like this. And then when we calculate, the first screen that we see looks like this. So the first line is our test statistic. Our second line is our what? Sorry. Our Z, I guess second line is our test statistic. The third line is our p-value. P hat 1 is the decimal version of that fraction that we typed in, the 18 over 28. The p hat 2 is the decimal version of 75 over 205. So what is p hat? P hat c. And then if you keep going down, the only other thing it shows you is n1 and n2, which you plugged in there, so you don't really need it. So it calculates your z value, your test statistic, your p-value, the proportion, the decimal version of both of your proportions, and your p hat c. So I would definitely not ever type any of this individually in my calculator for any reason. So out of this, I would then write equals what? What number? And because it's a z, I'm probably going to go with 2 decimals. 2.81. Which means I've got my 0 reference. I've got 2.81 over here somewhere. And so we know that we have a p-value of what? And we are comparing that to alpha, which is 0.05. And we know that our p-value is what? Less than. So what do we write as our conclude? We reject the null hypothesis that what? Since the which means that we and then so how do I want you to write it for a test? Just exactly the right alternative. Please tell me I'm recording. Oh, there it is.